Episode 72, Radio Days Ireland, the AI panel.
The AI6 podcast with Joanne Sweeney.
Hello and welcome back to the AI6 podcast. In this special long listen episode, I'm handing the mic over to the full panel recorded live at Radio Days Ireland 2025. We're diving into a raw, real and an entertaining conversation about AI and its place in the world of audio, radio and media generally. You'll hear from James Cridland of Podnews, Glenn Mulcahy from Titanium Media, and from, yes, me, Joanne Sweeney. And the panel was moderated by Jess Kelly from Newstalk. So we share everything from productivity hacks and policy pitfalls to cloned voices, generative music, and the all-important question, should radio disclose when it uses AI, and is the future of radio safe? I want to say a big thank you to Teresa Hanratty of Learning Waves, organiser of the conference in partnership with the Independent Broadcasters of Ireland, for giving me permission to share this with you.
James, I want to start with you because I think AI has been around for quite a few years. And since the end of 2022, I suppose it's been a bit of a buzz term. And there's been doomsday headlines and every industry has been written off. Before we go down and have a group cry later on, can we start by talking about some of the potential of this technology from a radio point of view?
Yeah, I think there's incredible potential from what AI can actually do. I think there are two things about AI, two different parts of AI, and I think it's just worthwhile exploring that. One of them is generative AI coming up with content. There are websites that you can go to where AI can sing a song, can make a jingle for you, can write stuff for you, all of that kind of stuff. But there's also transformative AI, and I think transformative AI is super useful when it comes to radio. So if you have recorded an interview outside next to a busy road, then there is a tool out there, Adobe has one which is free, which will get rid of all of the background noise, and it will sound as if you recorded that in a studio. That's really useful. There's another website out there called vocalremover.org, and you can put a song in there and it will split the vocals from everything else. So if you're making a promo, but you just want the music bed rather than having to fight with the singer on that particular song, then, you know, that is a tool which is powered by AI, but allows you to make a great promo, out of that. There are a bunch of these tools, I think, transformative AI tools that, just on the very basics, doing a transcription of an interview that you've done, being able to take the phone-in show that you have in the morning and being able to go all the way through there so you know exactly what was talked about, and you can very easily pull bits of that out for reuse later on in the day, over the weekend, however it ends up working. So I think that there are two things. I think there's transformative AI, which makes our life easier and allows us to do more with less time. And then there's generative AI, and that's the more sort of scary, if you like, part of AI, because, of course, it can generate content for you. And that's not necessarily an ideal thing.
It can be a good thing, though. Quick show of hands. Who in this room is using an AI platform on a daily basis? That can be ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot. Oh, yeah. Okay, so there's a decent understanding, because what I have found, and I find quite interesting, Joanne, is that there are certain cohorts of the population who are so into this and that they've been dabbling and they've been using things like the Adobe voice enhancer. But then there's another section of radio colleagues who they're just allergic to the notion of it. They might have dabbled and not got stellar results, therefore written off the entire thing. How important is education when it comes to embracing this technology in our industry?
Well, if you think about radio from piracy to now in the AI age, prompt engineering, it's been agile and responsive, and you're very open-minded. And this is something that you must grab with both microphones. But collectively, we're all starting at ground zero when it comes to AI literacy, which is a good thing. So we all have to do our ABCs of AI and really understand the terminology and the application. And around the world, all governments now have AI strategies, and we have the EU AI Act. And they say the gold standard for all economies and industries and all facets of society, because it's very important that we have inclusivity in AI, is education. Microsoft and Trinity College Dublin released a report last week on Gen AI use in Ireland, and actually reflective of the show of hands in the audience, 48% of organisations in Ireland right now are using AI. A McKinsey report or a Deloitte report then stated that from 45 years and above, there's a sharp decline and a tail off. So we really need to embed education in this AI revolution. And I guess that's where, Teresa and Learning Waves come in.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring you in a second. But James, I want to jump back because that Adobe tool that you mentioned, it's something that I have played around with, but it's also something that I'm a little bit allergic to, because in some instances I found that it makes voices sound inauthentic. Yeah. And as someone who works for a talk radio station, I can tell a million miles away when someone used this product versus just re-recording or whatever it may be. Do we know anything about, not radio snobs like me, but like what the average listener makes of those types of tools, or instances where there are, voice duplicates being used to do promo reads, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, and those are two very different things, obviously, one of them being a transformative thing, and one of them actually generating stuff with that voice clone. I think the jury's still out in terms of how much you can spot these tools being used. They are getting better and better, harder and harder to end up spotting. There's conversations now going on about AI image generation. It used to be really easy. Just look at the hands. If there were four fingers and a thumb, that was probably a real photograph. Now that's all been fixed. So we need to be sort of careful, in terms of that. But, and a hint and tip, if you're using the Adobe one, most of us are probably using the free version, and the free version is turned up to 100%. If you then mix that with the original, then you can actually have half and half. Then it actually sounds really normal, but obviously the voice is the sounds that you don't want are far lower in that mix. So you can do occasional things with that. I have to say, some of the stuff that I get sent a lot of press releases in my day job, and it's very easy to spot the AI written press release. Oh yeah,
so everything is awesome and amazing.
Everything's awesome and amazing, and we're always taking a deep dive into such and such, and there are all of these tell phrases. So I think we have to be careful in terms of that. But lots of really interesting tools there.
Yeah, Glenn, I know you've done an awful lot of training of journalist reporters in particular in terms of Mojo. Have we seen a lot of enhancements on sort of the basic fundamental apps that you would have been endorsing a number of years ago with the implementation of AI, or is there a new suite that's kind of come to the fore now?
It's a really interesting question. I think I would say that I'm seeing polarization, and in a much, much more aggressive fashion than I expected. So some of the brands who develop apps in the marketplace have taken a staunch anti-AI position and saying we want to encourage human creativity. We don't want to just make it automated and standardized. And then there are others like the likes of CapCut for video editing, who you can quite literally go to ChatGPT, add the ChatGPT plugin for CapCut and tell it to make a video with a topic. And it will generate images, it will generate video, it will put text on and spit a piece out. So it really is, it's like that. And I think that echoes actually part, what I'm sensing from the audience as well. So can I just ask the audience a question? For those of you who put your hands up to say you use AI tools, how many of you are incredibly excited about the potential of where AI may go over the next 5 years? Show of hands. Quite a few. Okay, now the flip side. How many of you are petrified? Okay, less than I expected. Okay, fine. The reason I asked that is that, to go back to your point about the amount of press releases and everything you get, trying to keep up with the pace of development is the greatest challenge. And this is true of all the developers I know, and myself as well as a trainer. What we see on the day-to-day applications that you may all be using is just the tip of the iceberg of where the real development work is going. And it's the longer-term stuff that is making me very nervous.
Yeah. But I suppose just to try and stay optimistic about it for like a millisecond longer, please. I'm trying. No, but one of the areas, I was out with Microsoft a few weeks back and they did their AI tour and they were talking through the agentic AI and how their sales team, for example, they're now spending 40% more time on the road meeting clients rather than doing the admin side of things. And I suppose there's a real opportunity there to embrace some of the fundamental time savers with this technology. So whether that is cutting down on admin, whether it's contributor sheets, the day-to-day stuff that a lot of us would kind of roll our eyes to the skies when we do a rundown of what we're spending our time on. But Joanne, I had conversations there over the coffee break and some people were saying that it's difficult to know where to turn to get unbiased, clear, easy to digest AI for dummies, essentially.
Yeah, and one thing you got to consider in all of this is where does the human voice sit in with the AI generated voice? But the other side of that for radio is we are living through the productivity frontier. Everybody in radio triple jobs. And every time that you're asked to innovate, the response, the pushback that you get is, but we don't have time. This is the huge opportunity that exists. The other thing that I would say is where radio has edge is that human connection was the theme of the last 2 days. And we're never going to lose that as long as radio is around because AI has no soul. But for 10 seconds, Martin, can we have an entertainment interlude? And this is 10 Cigarettes by Girly Girl.
Girl power, we can do anything. Girl power, buy my own wedding ring. I love being a girl, I'll do a little twirl. Always be kind.
What?
So that just to demonstrate what people are doing with AI, It is an AI generated girl band. That song has 4.5 million views on Spotify. And so radio has a place. They're not going to replace you guys, but if you go and have a look at their website, it says we're capturing the emotions and the culture of where girls feel they are right now. But everybody wants to make a buck in the AI age. They say we're going to have the first billion trillionaires because of AI. But productivity is where radio should start. And that should be your starting point. How can we be more efficient?
Glenn, you want to jump in?
There's one key differentiation, and I 100% agree with you. I think there are definite opportunities for efficiencies. I think what you need to do is draw a firm line between what is editorial-facing content and what is the back end that the audience never
necessarily sees. And this is where EU AI Act comes into play, and there's a whole host of regulation and legislation that's in place to safeguard that. And although it's as sexy as GDPR, which is not at all, it is really important to have an understanding from the managing director right down to the intern of when it can and can't be used.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I actually work with the CNN Academy at the moment. They've just gone through the whole 2-year cycle of research and innovation. They have a dedicated team that have tried like 200 different applications and have now finally said, here's a suite of tools that are non-editorial facing, but the journalists are allowed to use. There's no risk of being fired. Whereas in other organizations, in the absence of that policy, you can find yourself in hot water so quickly. So as to give everyone within the radio organizations a tip, it would be a centralized innovation group doing research and development for all of you, where you can feed back and kind of do best practices would be hugely valuable if it doesn't exist already.
Yeah, and James, I suppose that brings us to where should a radio station in 2025 be on their AI journey? Because it is going to be a journey and there's going to be a lot of, apps and, as you said, press releases. Everything now has, with added AI, a lot of it's going to be junk. So where should stations be, they, local stations or national stations be in terms of assessing what's going to work for them?
Well, I think certainly a lot of it is freeing up your people to be more creative. I see AI as not replacing human beings. I see AI as enabling human beings to be more creative, to do more things that humans can do. And to, as an example, I used Google Gemini the other day. I said, from this PDF, it's almost as if I was reporting, JNLR numbers, from this PDF that I can't do anything with, please could you add up this particular column and tell me whether this column is bigger than this column? That sort of stuff, actually AI is really well suited for. It won't always get the right answer, by the way, but it's very well suited for. That is very different than saying we can't be bothered to pay for an afternoon jock. And instead of having a human afternoon job, we're just going to type some words into an AI tool. Anybody who is doing that needs to take a long, hard look at themselves and work out what they're doing. But there are scales in this, I think. Is there something? I know that Southern Cross Stereo in Australia is using AI cloned voices of some of their talent to do a few very small little jobs like localized traffic that wouldn't exist otherwise because they can't get 40 different stations to do localized traffic, but you can from one place with a cloned voice. Do you do that? There's an American radio company that clones the voice of their breakfast show. Their breakfast show is on 70 different stations, I think, and they clone the voice of that breakfast show to read the weather during the day on those stations. Doing the weather is really easy, and it's just, here's the weather, and I'm back tomorrow morning from 6. I mean, those sorts of tools are interesting because they begin to be producing editorial content, but on the other side, they're not necessarily replacing a human being. Perhaps they are in the travel example, but
it creates brand awareness, and it's that familiarity of the faces. So you can understand the business side of it, but I suppose that then raises the issue and the fear factor for on-air talent, because if who owns their voice?
Correct.
If you were to be hit by a bus in the morning and your show still had to go out, could they just get programming and off you go? Are we going to see this becoming a bargaining chip now in contractual negotiations with on-air talent, do you think? And I suppose, is it an ethical line or is it a legal line? I'm trying to figure that out.
I do think it's a little bit of both, and I think also there's lots of work in the unions in terms of actually fixing this into your contract so that you can and can't do certain things. I mean, and let's be clear, it is sometimes very useful that if you can't get your station voice within the next hour, you happen to have a cloned version of your station voice that you can actually use to get you out of that hole. That's still a useful thing, even though you wouldn't use that cloned voice normally. So, again, there aren't necessarily it's not necessarily a black and white conversation. It's a conversation with varying degrees of a grey in there to help you know, okay, what is actually right for the person here? What is actually right for the station? Is there something that we can agree? And I know that there are lots of radio companies who have AI as part of their contracts now. But, I keep on coming back to the fact that when I learned how to edit tape on, using razor blades and China graph pencil and splicing tape, one of the first things that I was taught is how to change the words of a speech to make it sound as if the speaker was saying something completely different. That was my first, okay, here's your editing job. So we've always been able to clone voices, change voices around, change the meanings around. It's easier with AI. It's not the first time that we've ever been able to do that.
Yeah, I suppose it's because it's so easy and it can fall into the hands of anyone. Like just this week on Newstalk, I know Shane Beattie was talking to Malcolm Byrne about legislation that he's putting forward in terms of tackling deepfakes, because they have been a tool to misuse and abuse and all the rest. I suppose for the majority of the people here who are probably looking at how they can enhance the productivity and also the creativity and the happiness of their team with these tools, where do you begin? Is it about using Copilot within Outlook to summarize your emails so you're not having to send a thumbs up all the time? Where should someone who's in that position begin?
So everyone in each department in every station should develop a use case. So a use case is, what is a repetitive, menial, boring admin job that potentially AI could do for me, and I have human oversight. So the key is always the human in the loop, and developing those use cases, almost like your innovation labs, right, Glenn? And then being able to explain how you used it, why you used it, the purpose, and then the impact and the output. Sounds kind of very formalized, but it's actually just having a step-by-step kind of guidance. So a use case, and then I think a policy for a station, why we use AI, how we use it, what tools we use. Do we use paid tools? Because if you use paid tools, you can lock down the models using your information to train themselves. And that's where people are really worried about copyright and proprietary and confidential information. So it's policy and use cases and test and learn. I think radio should be a test and learn, and then look to see where the guidance under the EU AI Act from Commissioner Mann is coming.
Yeah, and Glenn, this is a really important point around cybersecurity as well, and why it's so important for stations to have a stance on it is that prevents staff from going on a solo run and uploading very sensitive information into one of these platforms, getting it summarised. Yes, it's serving your purpose, but it's also potentially a big data protection breach. So how do stations go about identifying the platforms that will work for them? Because there are millions and millions of platforms, apps and whatever out there promising to do all of the things, but it's about finding the right tool for you rather than the one that's, first result on Google.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the single greatest challenge, that if you're a small local station, resources are already stretched. So having someone dedicated to do that research and policy development is probably impossible, or certainly a very, very high expectation. But this is where communities like the Learning Ways community, the Radio Days community potentially can actually collaborate and also learn from best practices of other stations in Europe. If you look to Radio Days Europe, there's a huge community of people in this development cycle as well. So you don't need to do it on your own. I think it's a case of just putting some structure around that. But I would say a policy, to echo what Joanne said, is probably the absolute priority, because particularly, like, I'm teaching people anywhere from the ages of 21 in university to mid-50s. All the 20-year-olds are all over it. Like in UCD where I teach, there was a directive to say you're not allowed to use AI under any circumstances. And I asked in the class, so you got the directive, you're not going to do it, right? Deafening silence. Okay, explain. It's like, well, they didn't mention humanizers. And it's like, in case you don't know what a humanizer is, you generate an AI script, you get all your buzzwords, you put that into a humanizer, and it makes intentional mistakes so it can't be detected as AI-generated content. These are 20-somethings who've already gamed the policy of the university before the end of the year. And that's the problem. Like, there's so much out there that if you don't have a strict policy that says you do this, you get fired, people will experiment. And as we saw with the Irish Times, and I'm sorry if there's anyone from the Irish Times here, you'll end up putting an editorial piece out that's AI generated, get called out publicly, and irreparably damage your brand. That was featured all over the world as a story. Yeah. So don't let that be your story. A bit of research and policy right now is really priority.
I do, because that Irish Times example, and there's so many examples from the US as well that people have been publicly found out for using it. What's the best practice in terms of the disclosure? Should companies have, when companies do have their policies, should it be absolutely use it for in-house stuff, but disclose when you've used it? Do you just own it, or do you try and hide it so you get the best boy in class sticker?
Never hide it. I think if you hide it and get found out, the potential damage to your brand, to the individual who did it, is absolutely, could be catastrophic. So the best practice, this is based on multiple broadcasters, TV broadcasters particularly I've worked with, is use it under limited purposes. There's often a chain of command where it has to get editorial approval before it can be published, but there's a very clear stipulation about when, and when you do, you say you have done it. In fact, in many cases, for instance, Al Jazeera was with just a few weeks ago, they will state the actual tools that they use to make the content. That is definitely best practice.
And I'm going to sort of slightly argue against that, because I don't remember too many albums in the 80s saying this album used a drum machine. I don't remember that, but we're talking about exactly the same thing here. A drum machine has replaced a physical drummer. You remember the Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody album. And Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody album, if you have a look on the back of that album, it says all live instruments. And Queen very quickly changed their view, but it certainly doesn't say on the back of A Kind of Magic some electronic instruments were used in this in this recording. I think it's difficult. Now I produce a daily podcast where I sometimes have to use AI voices to read out quotes from people, because I live in Australia. I'm not going to ring people up in the middle of the night and say, could you please read that out into a voice memo? That's not going to happen. The way that I do it is I do actually get that voice to end up saying right at the end of the clip, I was made with AI, or I was made with Wondercraft. I think that's a good thing. But I think, again, we just have to be careful. There are things that we use where we should be saying, of course, I've used AI for this. But there's also, like that drum machine example, pretty well every piece of media is going to use AI in some way, shape, or
May I reply?
I'll allow it.
No fisticuffs, I promise. I don't care about the trust of the drum machine. Whether you use a drum machine or a real drum is not actually going to affect my trust of you as a band or as a musician. If you put a piece of content out that simply never happened, if you create a piece of content that says something that is completely artificially generated,
agree.
And if the audience discovered that you've done that without saying it's AI, that is game over for the brand. So that's where I think it's really important you draw the difference between the digital reproduction and generating something new. But you're right in saying generative versus transformative, 100%.
Because AI hallucinates, right?
Well, it does. But it also, I think one of the things, particularly for talk radio, when it's personality-led, or even in politics, if the Minister for Housing was to give a really impassioned speech about, the homelessness figures, and then it turns out that a speechwriter was off sick and he used ChatGPT to, write insert here, there would be an absolute outrage because it's the authentic connection. I think that's why people love radio, is because they're getting your actual views. And, there's a difference, I think, between using AI behind the scenes and then using it for content that is going out, particularly content that's being portrayed as being an opinion or a passionate opinion. That's where I think things get a bit dodgy.
They do. And last week we had precedent in the UK where the Minister for Science and Technology had to disclose his ChatGPT search on the back of a Freedom of Information request from a journalist. And the journalist admitted, I did not expect a response, never mind the transcript of his ChatGPT search. And he was asking ChatGPT to actually explain a government policy and then to recommend which podcasts he should go on. So there is a level of questioning around how organisations are using AI. But back to radio, you guys are the arbiters of truth, the fourth pillar. As
Kira.
Bernadette said, yes, thank you, in the presentation earlier. So explainability, transparency, human in the loop, human oversight and ethics are four key principles of your AI policy. So once you use those as your guiding principles, you should be fine. But editorial is editorial. We know how strong we have to sit with editorial, and that should never be compromised or even considered.
I think it's also too soon with the audience to know how they actually feel.
Yeah.
We're into year 3 basically of public AI. Going back to your point, I'll put a wager on it with you. We don't know yet if the audience actually will have a knee-jerk reaction to the idea of AI generated content, or whether they'll go, yeah, it's all fine. I spoke to a friend in Korea. They have a television station in Korea where the anchor is AI generated, broadcast every single night, and the audience don't give a crap, excuse my language. I think with the polarization we touched on earlier, local radio in particular, the idea of the faces that you know in your community that you can trust is going to go massively up, in the same way that Etsy versus AliExpress has this unique human touch and value.
Okay, we have time for one or two questions. Are there any questions in the room?
I just wanted to expand a little bit on that last point, is that where would you draw the line, say, between something like a spell checker, then to Grammarly, and then perhaps if you write an article, to drop it into a Claude or ChatGPT just to say, look, polish it up a bit for me. I think that you're not going to be able to stop that sort of thing happening in the real world, and certainly in business, possibly on media, but that's already what it's being used for. If you reply to somebody's email and you want to make it more polite, that's what I sometimes do. If I have to reply to one and say, please take the anger out of this email.
I do the same thing every day. Yeah. Okay, so where do we draw the line? Is the line a dot? Have we already gone past that? Because so many of us have been using tools like Grammarly and so on for years now.
Okay, I'll go on it. I think on the personal use cases is not the same as having a public service responsibility. So I think there is a reasonably clear line of definition between the two. This is where quantifying and having a policy is important. There are use cases where you can write a script, if you're willing and if it's permissible within the station, to put it into something like ChatGPT, where you've trained it on your own data. So as Joanne has touched on, it's your own model, and you can ask it to examine it for bias. You know, these are really useful things. These are actual skills I'm teaching to the journalists every day. So you can build a suite of tools that are very specific, that you have a degree of sandboxing around, that absolutely are going to be useful and are going to streamline process. It's when you go into the wild west of playing ChatGPT off against DeepSeek and getting all these multiple responses that it starts to get very, very muddy. And that's where you don't know, unless you're really, really good, you don't know if the hallucinations have started to kick in, if it's factually accurate, and you're risking your relationship and contract with your audience if you breach trust. So that's where I would say, like, editorial, if I'm going to publish it, I want to be able to stand over it. If I use it, I'm going to say I used it. That's my take.
Yeah, and I think that what you get out of any of these tools is based on what you put in. One way that I love to use it is I speak my stream of consciousness. So I might be in the car and I might record myself and speak for 10 minutes and then get it to format my thoughts for me. So really making sure that it comes from you inherently, and then I train it on all of my own content.
But then as a human being, you would go back and check that.
Oh, 100%.
And you would make sure that that was absolutely right.
100%.
And in the same way, if we asked an intern, please could you go and write that, we would check that intern's work. And all an AI tool is it's an intern.
But I think that's an education piece, though, where you have to tell people not to trust it, because a lot of the conversation, a lot of the PR that's been out there is, this is so smart, it could take your job. It's not going to. It's going to let you keep working. So just use it. Yeah. Whereas we need to talk a little bit more, I think, about the fact that it's not the be all and end all. And you can also prompt it to say, don't be afraid to say you don't know the answer to this question. Because I don't think that's necessarily being spoken about enough, because it's being pushed, as I said, as the be all and end all.
Yeah. And if you even, as an example, just ask ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude a question about what's happening in the world and let it answer it, and then go back and say, is this the truth? Or what is the truth? Where did you get it from? You know, then you'll kind of go, whoa, that will kind of pull you back into line.
Yeah.
Go, okay.
But, you know, I mean, any responsible broadcaster, publisher will check something humanly before it is published. If we're not doing that, then, I mean, you know, we're all going, you know, we're all going to die. But I think as long as the human being is the final arbiter here, what concerns me about some of the things, particularly coming out of the US and Canada, is seeing, you know, automated GPT voices being put to air without any editorial oversight. And that is a really slippery slope.
Yeah, and I think it is that balance between behind the scenes and on air. We've got one more question.
Guys, great points about the accuracy and the reliability and the hallucinations that it can have. Now, all of that being said, what would be the best apps for repurposing a current affairs show with a small t?
If it's video, you got to use Opus Clip. It's amazing.
And I think you have a list of apps, don't you, that you'd recommend. So this QR code.
This is going to give you a nightmare. No, I'm joking. This is the positive one. So these are 66 apps that we've tested on the 3-day immersive AI course. Knock yourselves out. Let me know how you get on. Can I just say that the general consensus from people that I've taught, both in Learning Ways and other groups, is that you're going to find that there's an awful lot of hype around. There's an awful lot of over-promising. When you try to do specific tasks rather than just play with the tools, that's when you start to realize the actual limitations and where the shortcomings are. But there's a couple in there in video that will help you, including reformatting and text.
Okay, last question.
You asked us if we were excited or terrified, and maybe just put it to the panel, all in, you know, AI talking to AI, cutting us out, getting cleverer and cleverer and scarier and more threatening. How do you feel today, looking forward to 5 years, each of you?
Okay, let's start at the bottom and work our way up.
I think I'm very excited about doing less boring things and being able to focus more on creative endeavor and human connection. I think that is a stupendous opportunity that we're going to get from AI. And if we can use AI as our servants rather than people to think for us, I think it's a fantastic future.
Can I ask you to go next?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a marketer, right? And I can be replaced overnight. So I'm embracing it. I'm excited about what it can do for the human race and AI for good. But I'm really scared about the bad actors who very often are more intelligent and who can circumvent legislation. So that makes me nervous. And so my point is we need more people in the world driving AI for good. Those who are in the passenger seat and doing nothing is not good. Bit of both.
Okay, last word to Glenn.
I did a course 2 weeks ago in Galway for a group of 20-somethings, and at the end of 2 days, they referred to the feedback as being utterly traumatized. So can I give you context? Genuinely, I started out incredibly excited. I was an early adopter of ChatGPT. I was on it like a rash when it launched, and I spend 2 hours every day going through emails and RSS feeds and everything else with the latest launches. The fact that Donald Trump is president of the United States and that Elon Musk is effectively his puppet master and has basically lobbied for all regulation around AI development being removed is absolutely and utterly petrifying to me. My long-term fear, and I know Jess asked me to keep it light, my long-term fear is that when we play with the day-to-day tools, what we're not looking at is the roadmap that some of the big technology companies are looking at in 5 years' time. So I'm going to give you a couple of names. James, yes or no, say what you think. There's a guy called Mo Gaddo, who basically is the former head of business development in Google X Labs, who's written a book about this. If you want to hit me up afterwards, I'll send you the links. There's a talk on YouTube from two guys called Tristan Harris and Azza Raskin, who talk about what their concerns are about the pathway that we're chasing in AI development. This is all stuff that's 3 to 5 years down the line. So if this is stuff that's you're kind of completely new to, don't do this. But if you've already started to do a bit of research and you're trying to figure out where we may be going, please do this. The 1 hour talk from Tristan Harris, who was the guy behind The Social Dilemma, if any of you saw that documentary on Netflix, those guys, is mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing. And there's several others. I've definitely ended up down the rabbit hole, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, it's both massively huge potential, but also potentially massively disruptive and scary, and I don't want to underplay that at all.
The AI6 Podcast with Joanne Sweeney.